Good morning, afternoon, and evening, devotees, tourists, raiders, and many others. We are starting a new series, and it's going to be this is a YouTube series that I'm doing, or I'm going to start, and it's basically like a, you know, coaching type deal where I'm trying to bridge the gap between beginner, intermediate, and advanced players to being a better version of themselves that they can play on the ladder, get finish higher in ranking, playing some tourneys, and it's going to be like with transparent stuff. So not holding anything back or any of the sort. So, and the first is going to be, or the first segment of this series is going to be the five, or not necessarily top five, but five correctable beginner mistakes that I see beginners make or newer players. And typically they're in bronze or silver. Sometimes they're in gold or platinum, because bronze, silver, and gold you get, double pips, and it's easier to make it to platinum and higher. But that doesn't mean that they do. So this is not necessarily a comprehensive or definitive, decisive, everybody agrees, consensus top five, but this is my five that I see the most often. And we're going to go, like I said, it's not necessarily in any order, but this is what I would tell new players that they need to focus on to increase their win rate or increase their chances of winning games, which is better than, well, we'll get to that. So the first is you've got to play more. All right. And it's not just like jamming your cards and hitting by volume, keep hitting the play button and just, mindlessly throwing and playing cards, and that's the end. You need to play more with the aspect of I'm trying to practice, and I need to not only play, but also playing in the fact of, which will segue into another section of the top five or the five. But just because you play doesn't mean that you make it or understand where you're supposed to be in certain positions, especially when you're playing, in tournament matches or higher level ladder play, because the higher you get, the games last longer. So like if you're in Diamond or you're in Mythic, the games last longer because the players are more competent and they understand, and they know the position that they're in, and they know how to navigate it. When you play more, you start to understand, what your deck does, what are your outs, and many others. So playing more, you'll get an idea of how the game works, when you're supposed to pick your spots, play your threats, be more reactive, be more proactive, things of that nature. And which will go into the second, which is use your timer. And you'll always see content creators and people on Twitter, and I've done this myself, I'm guilty of this, where people complain about how players play too slow. And on average, the lower ranking or lower rating you are, the faster you play. Unless, you're one of the top 25 players in the world, like, Shota or any of those players that play at lightning fast speeds and they're playing control decks where you're not playing as fast. But on average, the lower rated players or the lower ranking players, the beginner players, are playing faster and faster because they believe that they're supposed to use all their mana. They're supposed to just play their stuff out mindlessly. And, well, I'm just supposed to do all this at the same time or all the time. And they're not thinking about their plays, and they're not using their time to their advantage. And that's the whole reason you have the timer. And the better you are, the more time you use. That doesn't necessarily mean that you play, like, the better players are always at zero when you're on, you're the final plays of, game 3. It just means that the better you are, the more time you use, because you're thinking about your plays and you're planning them out. Also using your timer, use your opponent's timer, in that when the opponent is thinking, you should be thinking about what they're going to do, and you should be planning out your plays in response to what they're going to do and trying to stop them from doing what they're doing based on what you have in your hand, what the position is, and how you can further your plan based on what your deck is doing and how to navigate that situation. So, like I said, number one, once you play more, because this is like the foundation is you got to play more. And number two, you use your timer because the more you play, the more you understand, and the easier it is to have that knowledge and understanding to know when to think about your plays and when you could just, throw your land. Think about your land drops and stuff like that. So use your timer. Next, easier accessible formats. All right. The newer you are, especially on Arena, the harder it is to get into formats. Historic is the hardest format to get into because of all the extra sets, Jumpstart, the remastered sets, Historic Horizons, and many others, and the historic anthologies. So those sets are hard to get, and you got to spend wild cards, and you got to buy packs. Well, if you're spending hard-earned money on standard sets or even alchemy sets, you don't have as much gems or gold or, extra money to spend on historic sets. If you are a more free-to-play, you might have your tokens, you might have your redemptions, or wild cards, obviously, and many others to make sure that you have easier access to packs. If you want more decks to play, standard is the easiest to get into unless you're a limited player. If you are decently average at limited, I am not, so I don't play it. I spend money. If you're decently average at limited, meaning that your win rate is about 47% or higher, on average, you will break even and increase your collection. And that's the easiest way to get cards. And it's easier on the accessible formats because limited is tied to standard, and that is the easiest way to grow your collection in the standard realm. And then all of the whatever luxurious or extra stuff that you have, and I say luxurious because the extra stuff that you have is probably going to your standard decks that you're trying to build your tier 1 or popular decks by content creators or tournament results or whatnot, is not going to historic. So you'll be using about 95% of all your resources on standard unless you're an alchemy player like I am, and you're using that extra stuff on the alchemy sets a month after the standard set releases. And historic is the hardest to get into, but the easier the format, the easier or the most recent sets are the easier accessible formats and the least complicated. So it's easier for you to play in those queues in the rank structure to increase your win rate. You're not taking no standard or alchemy deck into historic because if you don't have any historic cards, the chances of you winning a match there are very, very slim. By the way, I did not mention this, but I'm going to mention it now. This is all for best of 3. Best of 1 is...
Ghost Danny. Like, I can't see her, but she's taking care of the kids.
I don't play best of 1, although best of 1 is more important. Or, not most important. Not most important, misspoke. Is more popular than standard or alchemy best of 3. And those are queues also. So you have best of 3 standard alchemy historic and best of 1 standard alchemy historic rank queues for constructed, and best of 1 and best of 3 queues for limited. Although I don't think best of 3 is a limited queue for ranked. So easier accessible formats will increase your win rate because there are a lot less cards to acquire and a lot less wild cards to use and a lot less money being spent. Excuse me. God, he barking at something. Build more decks, chat, or YouTube or whatnot. And 95% of the decks that you build are going to be bad. I build a lot of decks, and about 95% of them are bad. And the reason, and this is also tied into, like I said, that you've got to play more. When you build decks and you're a deck builder, it increases your chances of building a better deck. And it teaches you why better players make certain decisions about deck building than the not so experienced. The more experienced you are at deck building, the more opportunity that you have to expand your horizon on many other different types of decks, and it increases your chances of playing different archetypes, and you don't become like a specialist. Like you're not just a strict macro control player or aggro or mid-range or whatever, right? You're going to be building different decks for different archetypes for aggro, mid-range, and then there's sub archetypes with aggro control and stuff like that. So building more decks, which is in conjunction with playing more, forces you to make those decisions, and then you have to put them to the test. And that teaches you what works and what doesn't work. And it doesn't matter what your rank is. It doesn't matter how well you do or how bad you do, because 95% of the time, the first build of a deck that you have is going to have the lowest win rate, because you're not doing the deck is not the most refined, and there are a lot of mistakes that you're making. So build more decks, understand that the deck building process is...
Go ahead and talk.
And the deck building process is a methodical one, and the best decks being built is almost an art. So build more decks, it'll make you a better player regardless. And finally, this one can be applied to anybody, and that is conceding too early. The majority of the content creators, especially best of one players, will tell you that volume means everything. If you're trying to get better and you're trying to understand how games are played and every position matters, conceding is probably the worst possible decision that you can make. Unless you're so far behind, like, you miss like 3 land drops and your opponent has curved out the entire time. That's like a corner 5% or less than 2% case of non-games. There are a lot of non-games in Magic, but you need to understand, especially as a beginner, what those non-games feel like so that you understand when it's appropriate to scoop. And you're not going to know unless you actually are in that position or you felt that position before. And you'll see content creators scoop early. You'll see even advanced, good, and elite players scoop early. But generally, those players know what that position is and why that position is. You don't. You being the beginner to almost immediate. Or intermediate, excuse me. And if you're in the lower ranks and you're conceding too early, you need to learn those positions and you need to understand why they exist. And conceding too early will not teach you anything, and you won't learn much. Yeah, volume means a lot, especially in best of one on the ladder. But conceding too early doesn't allow you to learn how to maximize your winning chances in those games where you're really, really tight, and where you would concede and lose some pips. You could stick it out and win and have a potential to be in a winning position. And the more times that you're in a winning position, the higher your win rate increases. So learning those will be in the position to not conceding too early. So let me know in the comments below what you think are some of the correctable beginner mistakes between bronze and silver, how to get to gold and platinum. And if there's some that I did not discuss or information I did not discuss, please let me know. And let me know what you think of the video in the comments below.